I should have known something was wrong when I found my sister-in-law's earring in my husband's car. A tiny, perfect pearl winking at me from the shadows of the passenger seat footwell, like a malevolent eye. It was a Thursday, the air thick with the promise of rain, and I had been looking for a pen I'd dropped. My fingers, instead of closing around cool plastic, brushed against something small, smooth, and utterly out of place. My breath hitched. I knew that earring. It was part of a pair my mother-in-law, Mill, had proudly given to Celeste, my sister-in-law, for her last birthday, expensive and distinctive, with a small diamond chip nestled beside the pearl. Celeste wore them almost every day, a symbol of her favored status in Mill's eyes. And now one of them was in my husband Phil's car, nestled in a spot that suggested it had fallen from someone's ear, not from a bag or a pocket. A cold, sharp shard of dread embedded itself in my chest. Phil, my husband of 10 years, my college sweetheart, the man I was trying to have a baby with, had claimed his recent, increased contact with Celeste was purely about family business, helping her with some financial troubles. He'd given her a ride home last week, he'd said, after her unreliable little sports car had finally given up the ghost. It was a plausible story, one I'd accepted with a distracted nod, buried in my own work and the hopeful, exhausting process of tracking ovulation and prenatal vitamins. But this felt intimate, accidental, real. My name is Ida, and for a decade, I had built my life on the foundation of Phil. We were a team, two halves of a whole, or so I had believed. At 35, we had what looked from the outside like a perfect life. A beautiful 4-bedroom house in a leafy suburb, successful careers. He was a rising star at his financial advisory firm, and I ran my own small but thriving graphic design studio, and a wide social circle. We were the couple who hosted summer barbecues and cozy holiday parties. My brother-in-law, Derek, Phil's younger, more easygoing brother, was a constant, welcome presence, often showing up with a six-pack and an easy smile to watch the game. And then there was Mill. Mill, my mother-in-law, had been a force of nature since the day I met her. A widow for 5 years after her husband, a kind but perpetually unsuccessful businessman, passed away, she had transferred all her formidable energy and ambition onto her sons, particularly Phil. She'd moved into a small, impeccably decorated apartment 10 minutes from our house, and her presence was as constant as the changing seasons. She would drop off casseroles I didn't want, rearrange my kitchen cabinets with a sigh of long-suffering efficiency, and make comments that were like paper cuts, small, sharp, and drawing invisible blood. A man like Phil needs a wife who understands the pressures he's under, she'd say, or, "You're so lucky he married you, dear. He could have had anyone." I'd learned to let it wash over me, attributing it to the loneliness of a widow who defined herself through her children. But the pearl earring changed the molecular structure of my reality. It was a single, dissonant note in the symphony of my life, and once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. In the days that followed, Phil's behavior, which I had previously explained away as stress, now seemed cloaked in sinister meaning. His phone, once left casually on the coffee table, was now a permanent appendage, always set face down. He started working later, his explanations for his absences becoming vaguer, coated in a layer of defensive irritation if I pressed. "You know how it is, Ida. Big clients, big demands. I'm doing this for us, for our future." And then came the gifts, extravagant, uncharacteristic bouquets of flowers, expensive perfume I never wore, jewelry that wasn't to my taste. It felt less like romance and more like a payment, a bribe to quiet a conscience I didn't know was screaming. Mill's visits intensified, her comments shifting from passive-aggressive to openly critical. She began to speak of legacy, of bloodlines, with a fervor that unnerved me. The family name must continue, Ida. It's your duty to provide an heir. Phil's father. He left us with nothing but his name. We must ensure it thrives. She started talking about money, about the importance of old wealth, and consolidating assets. Topics that had never interested her before. She'd look at our home, our life, with a calculating gleam in her eye, as if appraising a piece of livestock. This house could be leveraged, she'd murmur to Phil, who would nod thoughtfully, avoiding my gaze. I felt like I was living in a gilded cage whose bars were slowly beginning to tighten. The true cataclysm, the moment the ground gave way completely, happened on a rain-lashed Tuesday evening. Phil had texted he'd be working until midnight, preparing for a major client portfolio review. A gnawing anxiety, fueled by the earring and the escalating strangeness at home, compelled me to action. I decided to be the supportive wife, to bring him dinner from his favorite Italian place and perhaps, in that gesture of love, bridge the terrifying chasm that had opened between us. I drove through the slick, reflective streets, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The reception area of his firm was dark and silent, the only light coming from the wall of windows overlooking the stormy city. But a sliver of yellow light spilled from under Phil's office door. My spirits lifted slightly. He was here. I could fix this. I pushed the door open gently, I come bearing carbonara, dying in my throat. The office was empty. The air was still. The only sound the hum of his powerful computer, and the drumming of rain against the glass. He'd stepped out, I told myself. To the restroom, to the break room. I set the takeout bag on his desk, my eyes falling on the large monitor. A spreadsheet was open, filled with complex figures and account numbers. Next to it, minimized but visible in the taskbar, was an email draft. The subject line made my blood run cold. Project Legacy Phase 2. Legacy. The word mill had been hammering into us for weeks. With a trembling hand, I moved the mouse, waking the screen fully. The email was addressed to a woman named Celeste, my sister-in-law. The first line read, Ida remains compliant, though increasingly anxious. The insemination schedule proceeds. The financial transfers are almost complete. We proceed to Phase 3 upon confirmed conception. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. This wasn't an affair. This was something so much more calculated, so much more vile. Insemination schedule? Compliant? I felt like a farm animal, a broodmare in a business plan. I clicked on the Project Legacy folder on his desktop. It was a trove of horror. There were documents for a company called Ethelred Holdings, with bank statements showing massive transfers from our joint savings, from lines of credit I didn't know we had, from what looked like client accounts. He was embezzling, on a colossal scale, and he was funneling it all through this entity. Then I found the file that stopped my heart entirely. It was a scanned PDF of a life insurance policy, a $2 million policy, on my life. And the sole beneficiary was my husband, Phil. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The pieces, jagged and monstrous, slammed together in my mind. The pressure for a baby. The financial scheming. The life insurance. They wanted me to have a child, an heir. To complete the picture, to tie Phil down as a sympathetic, grieving young father. And then they were going to kill me. Asset liquidation. Phase 3. I was the asset. And they were going to liquidate me. A raw, guttural sound of terror and betrayal escaped my lips. I had to get out. Now. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it. I took pictures of everything, the email, the bank statements, the insurance policy. I screenshot the entire Project Legacy folder structure. I was a ghost in the machine, documenting my own planned demise. I fled the office, leaving the carbonara to grow cold on his desk. I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the rain mirroring the storm inside me. I finally pulled over in a brightly lit, all-night grocery store parking lot. The neon signs blurring through my tears. Who could I trust? The police? Would they believe me? Phil was a respected financial advisor. I was his anxious wife. Mill would paint me as hysterical. I thought of Mr. Gable, our next-door neighbor, a retired police captain with a kind face and a no-nonsense demeanor. He and his wife, Betty, had always been friendly. It was a risk, but it was my only lifeline. I drove to their house, the windows dark except for the porch light. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, wrestling with my fear, before the sheer, primal need for safety propelled me out. I rang the bell, my body trembling from cold and shock. Betty answered, her face shifting from surprise to immediate concern when she saw my state. Ida? Good heavens, child, what's wrong? She pulled me inside, wrapping a thick, knitted blanket around my shoulders. When Mr. Gable came down, I spilled the entire, horrifying story in a choked, chaotic rush. The earring, the changed behavior, the things I'd seen on the computer, the insurance policy, the embezzlement, the chilling phrases from Project Legacy. Mr. Gable listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. He didn't question my sanity or tell me I was overreacting. He saw the truth in my terror. Okay, Ida, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. You're safe here. First, we call the police. Not the general line, I'm calling a detective I know. Then we call a lawyer. The next 48 hours were a nightmarish blur. Detective Miller arrived, a sharp-eyed woman who took my statement with a focused intensity. She looked at the photos on my phone and immediately secured a warrant for Phil's office records. Sarah Evans, the lawyer Mr. Gable recommended, a fierce brunette with an aura of unshakable competence, arrived an hour later. She walked me through the process of obtaining an emergency protective order against Phil and Mill, and helped me freeze our joint assets, explaining that we had to move before Phil realized I knew and drained the accounts completely. I couldn't go home. The thought of walking back into that beautiful, treacherous house made me physically ill. The Gables, saints that they were, insisted I stay in their guest room. As long as you need, Ida, Betty said, her hand warm on mine. The legal and financial machinery ground into motion with shocking speed. The warrant on Phil's office yielded a treasure trove of evidence that corroborated everything I'd found and more. Ethelred Holdings was a complex web of shell companies Phil was using to systematically embezzle from his clients and from our own finances. The life insurance policy, taken out 6 months ago without my knowledge, was the final, damning piece of the puzzle. The phrase Phase 3, asset liquidation in the Project Legacy notes was now being interpreted by the police and the district attorney as clear evidence of homicidal intent. Phil was arrested at a business lunch 2 days after my discovery, the humiliating cuffing done in full view of his colleagues and clients. Mill was arrested at her apartment later that afternoon. She had been the architect, the mastermind. The police found notebooks in her home, written in her elegant, looping script, detailing the entire plan. She saw me as an obstacle, a woman of insufficient pedigree and strength who was holding her golden son back from the destiny she believed he deserved. A destiny of wealth and power that she felt had been denied to her by her own husband's failures. My death, and the subsequent insurance payout, was meant to be the final capital injection for their new empire, free of the messy complication of a wife. The most painful, yet ultimately redemptive, moment came from Derek. He showed up at the Gables' doorstep, his face a mask of devastation and rage. He thrust a USB drive into my hands. "Phil gave this to me months ago. Told me it was backup for a screenplay he was writing, a thriller. Told me I was the only one he could trust with it." His voice broke. "I looked at it last night. It's them, Ida. It's all of it. Their emails, their plans for you. God, I'm so sorry. I never knew. I thought Mom was just... Mom. I thought Phil was just ambitious." The evidence on the drive was the final nail in the coffin. It contained not just financial records, but deeply personal communications between Mill and Phil, discussing me with a cold, clinical detachment that was more horrifying than any outburst of hatred. They debated the best methods to neutralize me, with Mill even researching untraceable poisons, before settling on making my death look like an accident. A fall down the stairs, perhaps, or a car crash once I was pregnant and emotionally unstable. Faced with the mountain of evidence, including Derek's testimony and the damning contents of the USB drive, both Phil and Mill eventually took plea deals. The prospect of a public trial, where their monstrous scheme would be laid bare, was too much to bear. Phil was sentenced to 15 years in prison for grand larceny, embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Mill, deemed the primary instigator, received a sentence of 12 years for the same charges. In the aftermath, I was a shell. The betrayal was a poison that had seeped into every memory, every happy moment of the last decade. With Sarah's help, I divorced Phil, a swift and clinical severing of our legal ties. I sold the house, the furniture, everything that held the ghost of that life. The proceeds, after the courts untangled the embezzled funds, were mine alone. I used them not for a new beginning, but for an escape. I moved to a small coastal town hundreds of miles away, a place where the sound of the ocean could drown out the echoes of Mill's voice and Phil's lies. I bought a small cottage with a view of the water, and set up my design studio in the spare room. The work was my therapy, the simple act of creating beauty a balm for my scarred soul. The Gables and I speak every week. They are the grandparents I never had. Derek visits occasionally, our relationship forever altered, but built on a new foundation of shared trauma and his profound decency. He too has cut all ties with his mother and brother. It's been 2 years. The fear still visits sometimes in the dead of night, a cold hand on my heart. But it no longer rules me. I look out at the vast, untamable ocean from my little porch, and feel a sense of peace that is entirely my own. I survived. I outsmarted them. And I learned a brutal, invaluable lesson. The most dangerous prisons aren't made of stone and iron, but of trust and love, carefully weaponized by those you hold closest. Finding that pearl earring wasn't the end of my happiness. It was the key that unlocked my cage.